Hi, everyone. Another subject of mine that I love to share about is the century of missions. And here we're referring to the 19th century and how Protestant missions began to emerge and accelerate and help make Christianity a global religion. But before that time, after the Reformation, it wasn't the Protestant missionaries that really began to evangelize in new areas of the world. It was Roman Catholics. Uh, most most of the missionary work that occurred after the Reformation for the next 3 centuries was among Roman Catholic Christians. They saw, that really there was nothing more to be gained in Europe, and to the south they were bordered by Muslims, and to the east by Orthodox Christians. So Roman Catholic Christians decided to introduce Christianity to new areas of the world that they were exploring and colonizing. So, one of the most successful missionaries of this time period was somebody named Francis Xavier, who established a successful and lasting mission in India, significant outreach in Japan, and also was on his way to establishing a new mission in China before he died. Um, he encouraged his fellow missionaries to adopt many of the customs of local culture and in reaching out to new communities, and he emphasized the preaching and teaching of Christianity in the local language, which were both innovative missions and missionary concepts to the time. It's estimated that Francis Xavier reached more people for Christ than any other missionary that preceded him from the time of Paul, the Apostle Paul. He was very influential. He certainly reached tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Christians during his lifetime. But actually, most Catholic missions and missionary service, the most lasting influence occurred in the Americas, especially but not exclusively South America. I lived in Virginia for a period of time and was always surprised to find that really the first Europeans to come to Virginia were actually Roman Catholic missionaries coming to proclaim the gospel in parts of Virginia at the time period. But then a period of Protestant missions began to emerge, and one of the most famous early Protestant missionaries was somebody named William Carey. He was a famous Protestant missionary to India, and one of my favorite quotes from him is, "Expect great things from God, attempt great things for God." A wonderful, very inspiring quote from William Carey. So, where did Protestant missions finally begin to take off? Certainly, I've mentioned a little bit about Moravian missions and missionaries. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. But David Brainerd was an early North American missionary to Native Americans. So was Adoniram Judson to Burma in Asia. But at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, there was a large number of missionary societies that were established. The Baptist Missionary Society, the Church Missionary Society, the Wesleyan Missionary Society, and later the China Inland Mission established by Hudson Taylor. And of course, some of you are familiar with Wycliffe Bible missionaries established in 1942. But some of the early missions experience was inspired by the Haystack Prayer Meeting at Williams College in 1806, where a small number of students began to pray and ask God how they could reach their world for Christ. And from that prayer meeting, it's estimated that nearly 20% of all college students in the United States at that time became involved in foreign missionary service. I've already mentioned briefly about William Carey in India and his influence there. Hudson Taylor also was extremely successful in establishing and inspiring hundreds of other missionaries to go to Asia through the China Inland Mission. He was innovative in the sense that he not only spoke the local language, he adopted local customs, but he was also very innovative in the fact that he dressed not like a Westerner, but like somebody like the local community, which was very innovative, but also controversial to some Europeans that thought that that was scandalous. Another missionary that inspired uh, missions later on was somebody named William Borden. He was inheriting the Borden family trust. He was going to be a multimillionaire, but he gave it all up to become a missionary to China, in China Inland Mission. And while in Egypt, preparing to go to China, he became ill and died. But as he lay dying in his hospital bed, he said, "No reserves, no retreat, no regrets." A phrase that inspired another generation of missionaries, and that was promoted by D.L. Moody and the student volunteer movement, which also generated over 20% of all college students in the United States at that time to go into foreign missionary service. Um, Here's a few brief facts about missions today. There are currently about 400,000 Christian missionaries working in foreign lands today. But honestly, to put that in, that seems impressive. And the U.S. currently sends out the most foreign missionaries, about 127,000, but it also receives the most missionaries, surprisingly, 32,000. But again, 127,000 missionaries from the U.S. alone sounds impressive. When you think about what happened in the 19th century, 20% of all college students, in modern context, that would be 3 to 4 million people. Brazil is the second largest mission sending country in the world with 34,000 missionaries. And here's a list of some of the most influential and largest mission agencies in the world: World Vision, Campus Crusade for Christ, and YWAM among them. A couple other factors that you might want to consider when we talk about missions that are important to bring up. Things that influenced and shaped missions in the world today. One of those issues is colonialism, its rise and fall. Because as missionaries were introduced into various parts of the world, it was often initially because of colonial expansion in the world. As travel began to make other parts of the world more accessible, European powers actually encouraged uh, missionaries to go and introduce Christianity to local populations. So missionaries often preceded, but certainly were also contemporaneous with the beginning of colonialism. The French, the Spanish, and the English, but also the Portuguese were very successful in establishing colonies. But the most successful, simply because of the influence of the British Empire after the Napoleonic Wars and the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, it's estimated that the next century that the British Empire controlled over 1/4 of the Earth's population and landmass. That helps explain, I think, why Anglicanism is the world's third largest Christian denomination. But after World War I, and especially after World War II, colonialism began to diminish and nations established independence. As a result, many thousands more independent and indigenous denominations began to emerge in these various former colonies, which leads to another important movement that helped shape missions philosophy today. And that is an idea called the self-governing, self-supporting, and self-propagating churches. It was a theory established by two missions theorists named Rufus Anderson and Henry Venn. And again, I'm running out of time, so we're going to have to make this 2 lectures. I apologize for that. I'll join you again in a minute.